The Apocalypse season just released in Marvel Snap, but did you know there was a fully data-mined Daredevil season that even I wasn't aware of? Let's take a look at what May has to hold. First up is Shadowlands Daredevil, a 2/2 with an on reveal that shuffles 3 demons, presumably the same demons from the Hood, into your deck. And whenever you draw a card with 6 or more power, this gains +2 power. There are a couple of dynamics that this card has that are pretty interesting. The first is, do you want to be drawing demons instead of the cards that are actually in your deck? And I think throughout Marvel Snap, the answer to this has largely differed, but I think most of the time the answer is going to be probably not. This is largely because Marvel Snap decks, being only 12 cards, are often dictated by the interactions between those cards. If you already have your V-Hand and your Frigga, sure, you don't mind shuffling some demons into the deck, assuming they even work with V-Hand, which I don't think they do, but you get where I'm going with this. If you already have your combo of cards that makes the deck work, well then yeah, you feel pretty good about this. But if you don't have your combo of cards that makes the deck work, you better be pretty sure that there are a lot of Marvel Snap games you can win by just playing a 1/6. And we've been in metagames where I think that probably was true, and I don't think we're really in one now, but there are certainly decks that this is a compelling addition to. I think one of the things that sticks out to me is how best can you use the second clause on this? Can you just put this in a starter deck and be like, yeah, he's going to be really big. He's just going to be like a really big guy by the time the end of the game comes around. I did this on turn 2, and then turn 3, 4, 5, and 6, he's just going to be a bigger and bigger man. That's going to discount my Scar, presumably. Like, we're going to be able to get something out of this. And that seems pretty plausible to me as a general thought process, if we just assume every card in the deck is going to be big enough to make that happen. But there are other 2s that can do that, right? Like, not necessarily in those decks, but Moondragon is a 2 that can do that. Something like a Chamber is a 2 that can do that. Just a 2 getting to that level of power isn't actually all of that much of an incredible thing to see. Is there a world where you're playing this in something like a Supergiant, which is a deck that can definitely use some 1/6s, but also has some specific tools that it wants to hit, and a lot of those tools are going to be less than 6 power, or the 6 power needed to trigger this guy? I think this card is likely to end up a little bit worse than it reads, because people probably won't understand that a lot of the time, shuffling demons into your deck in this era of Marvel Snap is almost more of a downside than it is an upside. Next up is Wilson Fisk, a 5/9 that costs 3 if you have the highest power card in play. I think this is another card that feels a little bit out of time, but it's definitely the kind of card that is, at the very least, a fairly compelling and interesting thing to do. Couple of specific interactions here. How does a tie work if you both have 6? Let's say you both played a lizard. How does that work? This card feels like it has pretty similar dynamics to an Iron Patriot, which is to say it rewards you getting ahead early by getting you more ahead. It is a fairly reasonable follow-up to an Iron Patriot, but what I really think is interesting about this card is it is gonna demand things that happen earlier matter more, which is good. Like, for example, how many decks are going to be able to beat a Martyr? Is their 1-cost card? Is that going to be able to beat out most 2s? That might actually be a legitimate thing you start thinking about. I doubt it, but it is something to consider. This is the kind of card that if you are able to get your investment on the board in a 1 to make sure Wilson Fisk is playable, then suddenly you are able to play an Iron Patriot, only a 2/3, and then follow it up with something that is basically impossible for it to deal with. Like, you're not beating 9 power on an Iron Patriot. That's just not a thing that happens. Now, is that necessary? I'm not sure. And how many decks where I want to do this am I going to be rewarded for doing this? Again, I'm not sure. The interesting thing about a big stat stick, and I've been thinking about this a lot in relation to Juggernaut's release today, is you want a big stat stick a lot of the time so you can take priority and then prevent your opponent from doing things with that priority. And I think really those are the situations where you want a big stat stick, and then you want a big stat stick when you're like a Sarah control deck putting points on the board on the final turn of the game. You're like a bounce deck or whatever. I don't think he can go in that second kind of deck. So he's really sort of just left with like the super giant-y home, but I can see that being a pretty compelling thing to do in a deck that is willing to play things like Lizard and Maximus and just really go whole hog on, I'm going to get priority and I'm going to play a really big guy. And that really big guy is going to help me keep priority. And then I'm going to play a super giant, and the super giant is going to, again, I still have priority the entire game, get Negasonic, get Cosmode, all that stuff. I can see that being a pretty reasonable use case for this guy. In fact, I think it's probably the most reasonable use case for this guy, but it's just something to think about a lot when we talk about a stat stick that doesn't scale, is consider what decks actually are interested in playing that card. Like, what decks are super intrigued at doing something like this? And a lot of them are going to be these sort of take prio, never give it up decks. Those kind of decks are really interested in that because they're going to be able to afford this, and he's going to help them do that. And then it's the Sarah decks. And I think that one of the things that you look at with Juggernaut, especially coming out, you're like, well, where am I actually supposed to use this? It's that he doesn't actually help you maintain priority in those super giant decks. And I think if he did, he'd be like a much stronger and more useful card in that kind of archetype. And instead, you look ahead 2 months to this and you're like, oh, this guy actually does do that. I can see where I'm going to be trying to use this guy. I get what I'm doing here. Oh, okay. It makes more sense now. And I think that this will put him above Juggernaut on the like general usability list for undercosted big guy. An extremely weird card, Punisher War Machine, yes, that is the full name of the card, is a 2/2. When you draw it, it marks a location that is empty on your side of the board. So just your side has to be empty. When you are winning that location, objective formulation of this, so just be winning the location at any point, +1 max energy. Really interesting card. First of all, I would imagine that the market gives is visible to both players, but even if it's not, there aren't going to be that many locations that are going to be empty for you. This is a card that is extremely interesting to be playing early because its own body is so minimal, but the upside of +1 energy the entire game is very, very, very real. When you compare it to things like Psylocke and Jennifer Kale, similar cards at the cost simply are not giving you this amount of potential upside. But when you compare it to something like a Superior Spider-Man, that's a card that gives you pretty similar potential upside, maybe even a little bit better on the body, that kind of thing. I can see Punisher War Machine hitting in that range. I can also see it hitting as high as like an Iron Patriot kind of thing. But part of me thinks that +1 energy is not exactly as worth it as you might think it is. Like, it's a nice thing to have, but you are playing a 2/2 to get it. This 2/2 is very useless later in the game. I also wonder about how this card interacts with your opponent's decisions, because your opponent being forced to play on this kind of card, be like, oh, I got to devote my game plan to preventing this from happening. That kind of thing's pretty interesting. I think that's a sort of compelling direction for a card like this to go. I mean, like, if you look at decks that exist right now, and I know people get on me sometimes for being a little too myopic about things that exist right now, but I still feel like they are at least worth discussing in terms of like allegory, maybe. Similar decks might have similar dynamics in the future. When you look at decks like this right now, like, this is the kind of thing where it's like, okay, you know, this is pretty interesting. Am I going to do it to get an extra energy in my Star-Lord deck? Is Star-Lord himself big enough to win this and make sure that my opponents aren't able to do anything? Am I willing to do that and give up the potential chance of Arnim Zolaing and things like that, right? Like, this is a really interesting card that I think has the potential to be a new Mr. Fantastic First Steps, but I don't think is going to fulfill that potential. There's a lot of scary text on this card, but largely I think it's going to hit a little bit under where the scariness of it reads, because it's just a fairly small body. And again, we're just in a situation where I'm not sure a lot of the decks that want to be doing this are going to be able to do this. Now, this does strike me as like very similar to an Iron Patriot kind of thing. That card has one more point of power, and the discount is in hand and harder to play around. Now, you could argue that either way, I think, but I do think that when I look at this card, I see a card that is worse than Iron Patriot, not better. This is a great top-down flavor for Muse. This is, of course, the serial killer from the most recent season of Daredevil. Spoilers, but his whole thing is he marks the places that he committed murders with, like, big murals painted in blood. So this is a really cool top-down for a person who does exactly that. Muse is a 3/3 that gets +3 power for each location where one of your cards has died. He's doing his little thing. He's like memorializing a little bit in the blood of the things that have died to make him stronger. That's what Muse is in Marvel Snap, but I mean, more than that, you look at this card and you say, okay, I mean, this could be a 3/12. Are we interested in a 3/12? I think one of the things that this card has going for it is that it is ongoing, so it's not a card that you have to get on the board and then do the thing with the way Weapon X is, but I do worry about, like, say, comparisons to Jack Flag, things of that nature. I think that if this card is able to find a home, it is largely in the context of the fact that Destroy has been, in my opinion, sort of cannibalized a little bit by shoutout. And shoutout is definitely the kind of deck that is very interested in just like a guy that is big and that is cheap. Like this could be, I realize this is a statement that's going to get a lot of people way too excited for this card, but I'm just doing it as an analogy. This could be the Hydra Stomper of the Destroy shoutout deck. In much the same way that Hydra Stomper is just like this big giant moron who is unapproachably large for a very cheap amount, but you have to do a lot of work to make him happen. This is the kind of card that could fill that role in the Destroy list. And I think that like that is, again, you know, probably underselling Hydra Stomper. Hydra Stomper is a really powerful card. I think Hydra Stomper is better than this card. But I do think also that this is the kind of thing that if Shou-Lao is still the right way to play Destroy, and frankly, like, people have talked to me about this. I don't know what they would have to do to Shou-Lao to make him not the thing I want to do in Destroy. Like people throw numbers at me all the time. And I think if he said like 5/8 +2, I'd be like, I'm still playing him instead of Null. Like, I'm just still happier doing that because playing a 6-drop sucks so incredibly much in the modern era of Marvel Snap. It's just so terrible. And I think that that's a really interesting thing to consider and keep in mind for the future, because I definitely feel like this is the kind of card that it's not made for, say, a traditional Destroy deck, but I can absolutely see it in one of those hybrids. And I like when I look at this, I really do think that there is potential for it to succeed at a high level in the context of the Shou-Lao Destroy deck as the Hydra Stomper of that list. Next up is Icari, who I'm not going to make any get in the robot jokes about. Icari is a 4/12 that can only be played in a location where your enemy is afflicted with negative power. So this is a, I would argue, fairly vanilla kind of card. Like 4/12 is not particularly amazing. We just started talking about Muse, and it's like, yeah, okay, you just said a 4/12 was, you just said a 3/12 was awesome, and it's like, well, yeah, that's a 3/12, right? That's a different thing. I think that a 4/12 is a much harder ask a lot of the time, but I can still see a world where people are like at least kind of compelled by doing something like this. Largely, if it's held back by anything, it's held back by two things. Well, poor formulation on that sentence. There are two things holding this card back. Thing number one is it's not particularly like good to be in a flick deck. And thing number two is if you are going to be in a flick deck, you have better 4s than the 4/12, right? If I'm going to be in a flick deck, I'll take an anti-venom basically any day of the week. If I'm going to be in a flick deck, I'll take a Man-Thing basically any day of the week. It's just going to be bigger, right? And so you have these cards that are competing with this card for space in the really only deck that it goes in. Like, maybe you could get some kind of hybrid Lockheed thing. But it's like, why are we going out of our way to do a 4/12? And that's sort of the big thing about this card is I don't know that it goes in any afflict decks, and I don't know that I want to go out of my way to do a 4/12. So unless someone comes up with something that's just like, this is such a free and obviously awesome thing to do with this card, I don't know. Sauron? Like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, it's like, that doesn't seem like a good thing either. Like, what decks want to do this and can't afford to do it without going out of their way really, really far? Because I don't think this guy is worth going out of your way for. Lady Bullseye is cool as hell. This is a card that is effectively like an X spell from Magic the Gathering. The way it works is this is a 2/2 with an on reveal that afflicts an enemy card with -2, and then for each unspent energy after that, you do it again to a different enemy. So this is like a very compelling kind of, I have the ability to make this, you know, this is either a 2/4 or a 3/6 or a 4/8, you know, like it is effectively whatever you need at whatever point on the curve, but it is relatively like it's like on rate-ish, but nothing particularly special about that. I've wondered about Marvel Snap's ability to make a card like this for a very long time. This is like a really interesting card to me because it sort of pushes a lot of other things in different directions where it's like, why would I be doing a vanilla thing when I could be doing Lady Bullseye? Is Lady Bullseye just going to be like the ultimate curve filler card? Like, are you ever just going to be in a situation where you're like, I don't have whatever card goes in this deck, but I do have Lady Bullseye, and so I'm just going to play her instead of the Copycat or Drax or whatever that I don't have? I can kind of see that. Like, she's just never all that bad. And I think there's a lot to be said for never being all that bad. But at the same time, I need to find something that gives me a hook and gives me a reason. Why do I want to do this other than like, it's pretty good rate? Because being pretty good rate and pretty consistent 2024, yeah, sure. Being pretty good rate and pretty consistent 2026, kind of getting slapped by a shoutout, buddy. Like, it's hard. This is the kind of thing that I think is an interesting and compelling card, like in a world where I'm playing, we keep coming back to Supergiant for some reason in this video, but that's definitely a deck where it's like sometimes I'm floating energy and it's like I really don't want to be floating energy, I just want to be playing bodies. And the reason we keep coming back to Supergiant, of course, is actually because that's a deck that wants to be playing bodies, and there's a lot of like body cards in this season that are just like, here's some stats and like here's a compelling thing to do with the stats, but it's not like they're hooking onto things in multiplicative ways most of the time. And so until I see a way for this to be a multiplicative card, I think I mostly have to analyze it as a body card. And there are only a few decks that are really interested in that, and those are largely the ones that are dragging other people down with disruption, so you kind of end up with Supergiant, right? But I can see this card being pretty compelling in a world where you're doing like, you know, your little Wong combo, right? Like this is maybe a better hazmat depending on how it actually works. Like, what does it mean when it says it targets a different thing? Like, let's say you did a Star-Lord and you have 15 energy, but your opponent only has 10 things on the board. Is he going to target all 10 and then go back? Or does it get marked off and then suddenly you're like, oh, I don't actually get the rest of the value of my energy here? I could see people doing like some goofy combos with this card. It seems like a pretty fun and compelling kind of thing. And when you compare it to like a hazmat, right? If you're doing your little Wong hazmat combo with your mystiques and things of that nature, I can see this in some cases being better depending on how many things your opponent has on the board. It's going to have to be a small amount, but I can see it, right? And so I think that like there's probably going to be a bunch of amorphous roles for this card, but the one that sticks out to me is the it's just going to be good wherever you play it on the curve kind of thing. That seems like the most compelling part of this card to me. Speaking of 2024 calling, Karen Page 4/5 on reveal, buff a 1, 2, and 3 cost card. Wiccan hasn't been playable in the entire year of 2026. This is like Wiccan if it was a little bit worse. Like there's cool stuff that happens here. You know, you get like your Superior Spider-Mans, your Mavericks, your Clea, you know, like there's stuff. There's definitely not stuff to do with this, but I think the early game curve for the buff deck is weak enough that you don't feel great about this. And then the, like, if you're going to be playing it instead of Wiccan, it's kind of just like, oh, I have this instead of Wiccan, and then I feel dumb because the rest of my deck doesn't do enough stats, right? Wiccan has been sort of a casualty of dumb stats decks don't win games anymore because they just don't have enough reactive tech to keep the things from going over the top of them that they need to keep from going over the top of them. And this is like if Wiccan didn't even give you the ability to have the tech to deal with it. Like I am pretty out on Karen Page as a card, even though you look at her and you're like, oh, well, it's a 4/11. It's like, yeah, okay, you know, kind of, but honestly, is that really worth writing home about anymore? And the answer is no, not really. I don't know why they did this. Sometimes when you look at Maverick, I'm like, why did they make a card that all-encompassing, right? Like, why wouldn't you do, like, a smaller portion of the pass-on buffs pie? But they made Maverick, right? And it's like, okay, well, at least there's not a second Maverick. And then I saw the data mines for this. And it's like, okay, now there is a second Maverick. What are we doing here? Now it's like, this guy's going to be a problem even if you nerf Shoutout. He's already a huge problem with Shoutout, but now it's like, I get a buff on my Maverick, I give that buff to the stick, I give that buff to something else, and it's like I've just laundered my buffs through everything in the entire game here. Like, yeah, okay, it's not as good as Maverick. I get it. It's a 4/3, it's a Series 4, it's worse than Maverick. I just don't know why you do it. Like, I don't know what the upside is in making Maverick worse, but Series 4 and being like, that's a card now. It also bothers me because it's like, this is the kind of thing that, like, if you feel like the Shoutout Maverick thing is too much, you might need to keep open in case you need to change Maverick into being something more like this. Like, I don't know if this card is going to be good, but it does strike me as particularly baffling. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.